Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today I want to have a bit of discussion about Chaos. You see, Chaos right now is split into a lot of different factions. The Warriors of Chaos, Chaos Undivided, the Beastmen, and of course all the different monogods. Norska counts too, but then again, who actually remembers Norska? Now the big issue that Chaos has is not a lot of units. It didn't have a lot of source material. Keep in mind that they've been split up to be monogod factions when really we have one Chaos Demons book. When it comes to the other Chaos factions, once again, lack of source material. It's just that they didn't really receive too much over the years. Most times, they just had their units updated with a new model and that's pretty much it. In regards to the Demons of Chaos, their faction is pretty much complete because they've been split up into 4 individual factions. This is why we ended up getting a little sprinkle of mortals, because there's simply not enough demons. Demons have not been established in the lore for a very, very long time, even in miniature form too. This is a massive issue because, well, we potentially do want more DLC in the future, mainly because we want new units. DLC makes the faction stronger, and we obviously want more legendary lords. It's that simple. Both Games Workshop and Creative Assembly have collaborated on this to kinda make it a little bit better by either creating a completely new unit, which for example would be the Doom Knights for Zinc. They never really existed in the lore. We had some illustration, but it was mostly focused around characters, and this is something that a lot of people wanted on the tabletop too. Or by just copy-pasting units, giving them a little bit of a visual change and a new name. This is of course the Exalted Plague Bearers, the Exalted Demonettes, the Exalted Bloodletters, the Exalted Pink Horrors. These didn't exist before. This is something completely new, and it's just essentially the same unit, just roided up a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that was a bad idea, but you can already see the limitations of the Demons of Chaos army book. Now, how is that going to work in the future when we're missing out on a bunch of different things? I'm not just referring to the monogod factions here, but I'm also referring to the Warriors of Chaos and everything else, anything that is Chaos related. They are starting to suffer because of lack of possible units. And yes, Games Workshop can start creating more and more new units, but keep in mind, if you've played Warhammer Tabletop in any form, when do we get new stuff? Getting new stuff on the tabletop is quite rare. It's becoming a little bit more common now because they realize that they can't keep selling you 25-year-old models over and over and expect people to buy it. But Creative Assembly does not have as much freedom as most people think because Games Workshop is Games Workshop and they are very protective of their IP, despite the fact that nothing from their IP is actually quite original, but let's leave that somewhere else. So what's the purpose of this video? Well, we need to talk about End Times and Age of Sigmar units. Now, before anything, there are some important things to note. One, Creative Assembly said that we're not heading towards the End Times and we're not heading towards Age of Sigmar, which is a perfectly valid response. However, there's a few things to note. Yes, we already have some Age of Sigmar stuff, like for example, the Exalted Keeper's Secrets and the Keeper's Secrets. Those are the variants that were brought in Age of Sigmar and are the most commonly used now, which, yes, it's something with the whole demons just being from the warp and all that type of stuff, which is perfectly fine. Nobody's saying to go to those timelines, in fact, but it's nothing against not using some of the assets available there. I mean, Creative Assembly say no End Times, no End Times, no End Times, yet we do already have End Times varieties in the game. Ark the Black, for example, uses End Times miniature variant, and obviously Eltharian's special unique roster is focused around the End Times too. You can keep saying no End Times, but you are taking a lot of stuff from the End Times. These are just some basic examples, and really the idea is, well, you can use them. Nobody's going to say no. As long as we don't get the End Time storyline or we go straight into Age of Sigmar, I don't think people will be mad. And at this point, if you're viewing this and you dislike Age of Sigmar, I understand your frustrations. I really do. But we need some of those units in the Chaos rosters, because if you're expecting Games Workshop to make more and more new stuff, the stuff that they're not going to be able to milk proper instead of like a DLC race, you're kind of mistaken, because Games Workshop wants the bigger money. They always think about the biggest return. That's always how it works. And yes, admittedly, the Age of Sigmar stuff is majority mortal, but that's really what we need at the moment for Chaos Warriors eventually hoping that they get some monogod factions, poor Sigvald, and, well, it could go into the monogod rosters, which, yes, they keep saying are demons with a sprinkle of mortals, but there are not a lot of demons. It's just how it works, unless there's a radical demon change coming up soon, which I very much doubt because Yeah, you could keep saying one thing, but you can mean something completely different. Keep in mind that this isn't the first time that Creative Assembly have basically lied before. There's also the very big rumor that's been floating about lately that most of the miniatures for Age of Sigmar, these are the Chaos Mortals, stuff like that, you know, stuff that fits in Warhammer Fantasy, will be backward transferable to Warhammer The Old World, the revival of Warhammer Fantasy in a brand new setting. And this works because of one reason. Well, Games Workshop are pretty much very lazy, and they won't make an entirely new roster. In fact, backward compatible stuff is kind of expected because we still have that with Warhammer Fantasy miniatures being in Age of Sigmar about, what, 6 years later? Maybe even more? I honestly can't remember when Age of Sigmar came out. Keep in mind that this also happens in Warhammer 40k and 30k, where backward and forward compatible miniatures do exist, so it's not completely out of the question. So if Age of Sigmar miniatures become backward compatible, this means that they will be, well, Warhammer Fantasy miniatures. That's pretty much it. They will exist in the timeline of Warhammer Fantasy. Sure, it's a few hundred years back, but it's still the same timeline. So, yeah. Now, with all that being said, let's start looking towards all of the units for Khorne, Slaanesh, Nurgle, and Zinc. Keep in mind that I will not be referencing any legendary characters, possible legendary lords and heroes. I just want to go over the units themselves because I feel that the characters themselves won't be too much of an issue. There's loads of source material and all that. And yes, I do think that we will eventually get some End Times characters because we're likely to get the End Times version of Nagash, let's be honest. But the main thing here is the units because the rosters themselves feel empty. And we all want the factions to be larger, not just with less than 20 units or just over 20 units, when every faction else already has so much more. So without further ado, let's just jump in. We're going to start off with Nurgle, mainly because Nurgle's in a pretty bad place right now, so we need a little bit of speed and we need a little bit more strength, which I think could be done with the Putrid Blight Kings. These were introduced in Warhammer The End Times, which is the end of Warhammer Fantasy, and they kind of worked like Chaos Chosen in a sense, but were so varied. The units were a mixed unit, which obviously doesn't work too well for Total War Warhammer, especially since we've seen that mixed units like the Man-Eaters aren't really a mixed unit, they've just been separated. The great thing about the Putrid Blight Kings on the tabletop is that they had so many different varieties, and the great thing about that for Total War is that you can easily have 3 different units because of that. You can have a sword and board, you can have a great weapon variant, and a dual weapon variant, meaning that you essentially have Nurgle overpowered Chaos Chosen in a sense. They'd be much stronger and they'd be much more durable. This means that 3 unit variants would already be available, and I mean look, they look cool. The main thing is cool factor, and this always is a plus. The next unit we can look at are the Pusgoyle Blight Lords. These are just Putrid Blight Kings mounted on Rotflies, and this could work out quite well. I believe these were introduced in Age of Sigmar, but the reason why these would be very popular is because right now the Rotflies are okay, but they are kind of weak and they do get damaged a lot. But if you can have some heavily armored Chaos Warriors or Chosen, I don't know what classification the Blight Kings would go into, then you'd be able to be a more durable. The fact of the matter is this also adds in a speed unit for the actual Nurgle faction, because Nurgle right now is lacking on speed, which yes makes sense, but having some fly support, which is another monstrous cavalry unit but can also do some pretty good damage, because I don't see the normal Rotflies performing too well, this would just add a little bit more flavor and you'd be able to have just a bit more of a punch. So this is technically cheating, as the character that you can see mounted upon this beast is a named character. In fact, there were 3 of them added in during the End Times, but I'm talking more about the mounts. These are the Poxmagoths. So Poxmagoths themselves are a rather interesting creature, and you can see that they look pretty cool. This is the main thing, cool factors always, but this could be a monstrous cavalry unit. These could be relatively fast. I'm not saying cavalry speed, but make them as fast as, say, trolls, for example, which would be faster than just general Nurgle-ish stuff, and you've already got a monstrous cavalry unit. They wouldn't be in massive groups, say 12 in Ultra, and then going down as you go down to different unit sizes, but already that gives you something quite interesting, something very unique, and a monstrous unit which would move relatively fast for Nurgle. You could essentially have 2 variants of them too, just a normal one which does damage, moves around and all that, and a second one which could be upgraded, which spits. There you go. You've already got a decent amount of units to add in. Next, we've got the Horticulus Slimex. Now, I don't know how these work in Age of Sigmar, because I barely play Age of Sigmar. I'm more interested in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, that's what my channel is focused on, and yeah, it's just how it is. But the model itself looks pretty cool. I mean, let's be honest, this is the main thing as always. but I see this being implemented in a very similar way to that of the Cornate Bloodthrone unit. Make it something which is a buffer, like a corpse cart, like a mortis engine, something like that. That means that you have something that goes relatively small, because I don't imagine a snail, despite the fact that it's got loads of feet, moving around very quickly, but it could move around with the rest of the Nurglish army and provide buffs as going. This could easily be a unit, maybe even a mount option if possible, because, well, it's just a plague bearer on the top, because that's what Nurgle is, but you know what I mean. It's just that simple, and you've already got something to just buff stuff, which would be good. You need stuff to move around and buff more, especially for Nurgle, if you're going to be taking a lot of damage while slowly moving towards your enemy. Sloppity Pile Piper could work very well as a generic hero choice, mainly because, well, you know, right now we've only got two options. It's a spellcaster with 2 different laws of magic, and then the cultist, which summons in demons, but that's pretty much all it does. So, having an option of a hero choice which is specifically focused around buffs, and I'm not just saying like the Locust, I'm saying proper buffs, and just kind of like a warrior priest in a sense, maybe even better to describe it as a moving mortis engine, you know, a hero mortis engine, which then could mount on the actual snail, which could kind of work quite well. The idea is just to have some more variety, because a lot of other factions do have more than 2 hero choices, and it would be nice to have more options. That way you can theme your armies differently. That way you can have just different uses. I don't like the way how heroes are right now in Warhammer 3, where they just simply exist to, well, let's be honest, take down rifts. The generic spellcasters will be very useful in the Immortal Empires, but the cultists, well, they need a bit more flavor, or bring in something else to have some other stuff around. That's it when it comes to Nurgle, more or less. Now, I'm not saying that they don't need Warriors of Chaos that look like Nurgle Warriors of Chaos. What you can see here is a Lord of Plague, which is a Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition miniature. It was actually in the 8th edition book. This would have been a Lord choice for you and all that, which meant that we could have had some stuff in the future, just, you know, Games Workshop and End Times means nothing. So hopefully we will get that, but I was talking more about original units. You see, with all I've talked about, we already have 1 DLC's worth, more or less, maybe even more, because, you know, they can start adding in variants and then reskinned units to be like Warriors of Nurgle and all that type of stuff, but that already solves a lot of the issues for Nurgle's problems. It's mostly mortal, yes, but then again, this blames falls on GW. But what you can see is that everything I've spoken about looks like it fits in Warhammer Fantasy, especially with Nurgle's faction, so it wouldn't change the feel and playstyle of Nurgle dramatically. Well, it wouldn't really change anything at all. It would still play as a Nurgle faction. So let's move on to the other gods. So if we look towards Slaanesh, we can start off with the Blissbarb Archers. Now, many people might be saying at this point, well, Chaos doesn't really have range, and they really do, because they do have the Javelin Throwers, they do have the Axe Throwers and all that, the Marauder Horsemen, so why not some archers? Keep in mind that these wouldn't be high elf tier archers or wood elf tier archers. These would be kind of weak archers, kind of like Ungors, and the main thing about them is that they run around and they skirmish. They're a skirmishing unit which keeps the skirmishing feel of Warhammer Fantasy for Slaanesh. All the units are comparable to illustrations of Warhammer Fantasy that we've had for Slaanesh in the past, so it's not like they're very far-fetched. Just a basic unit there, which you can have as a support unit. That's mainly the main thing. These will work very well to support other Marauders, the Seekers, and even, say for example, Demonettes, so you've already got a little bit there. Slickbait Seekers are an interesting unit mainly because they are Chaos Knights. That's pretty much the explanation about them in lore. They're just the chosen Knights of the Dark Prince. So what we see here are Knights of Chaos, just with their own look, their own weapon, because they use a halberd of sorts, and they're mounted upon Exalted Seekers, which makes them pretty cool just because of the visuals. You could easily have these, then another unit with sword and board, and that gives you 2 different variants. It just adds in a bit more flavor. Like the Heart Seekers, for example, they'd be very good at just slamming into the enemy from the side and so on. Again, it's another skirmish unit. You don't want these to just run into the front, but maybe these could be able to, just because the Exalted Seekers would be a bit more durable. Obviously, the Knights are a bit heavier armored. It gives you a different feel, and if you want to go full Seeker army, you can. Blissbarb Seekers further adds to this because that means that you get archers on Seekers, meaning that you do get the skirmishing feel, but you also get some range. That would be kind of good for kiting some stuff, which would work quite well, especially with Slaanesh. You want to be able to kite, despite the fact that you can't do that at the moment, and it's a very important thing when it comes to skirmishing tactics. Just one variant would be fine, or you could have a second one with poison arrows or something like that, because poison is used a lot with the Slaaneshi stuff, so you can even have just 2 variants variants there, and again, cool factor. They look interesting, they fit for the theme because these are dedicated Slaaneshi units, and it just gives you an option which really should have been there for day one. I don't know why we didn't get Marauder Horsemen with some throwing weapons, at least. Myrmidesh Painbringers are essentially just Chaos Chosen of Slaanesh. I mean, they look like Chaos Chosen. That's pretty much just the whole description that you can give them. And it's heavy armor. We need heavy armor. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would prefer just Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh. And these could work just as standard Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh, but you know what I mean. It's just, right now, we lack anything that can hold and take some damage whilst we get into position. It's something that is very strange that we don't have. And yes, we do have the speed over everything, but sometimes you want to be able to hold your enemy down so you can get them on other sides and not allow them to reform. It's just simple enough. They look cool. You can easily have them with great weapons too, and you're pretty much sorted, although there is another unit that allows for that. I mean, the Simbarash Twin Souls are essentially the same thing. It's the exact same model too. The only difference is the weapon choices in the head. So you essentially already have the weapon variants. You already have great weapons, you have sword and board, and obviously dual weapons. So you've already got enough to just add in for some special Slaaneshi Chosen or Pseudo Chosen. They could even be Chaos Warriors too. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail regarding the Slangors because we talked about them in the Beast Fiends video, but these could easily be an anti-infantry monstrous infantry unit, so you've already got something that can move around fairly quickly, because I imagine that these would move around fairly quick and do some damage there, just to add in a bit more flavor and be able to have a different unit, because Fiends are cool, but they're very squishy. These might be a bit stronger because they are armored. It very much depends. Think about them as a Chaos Spawn, just faster and wouldn't be unbreakable in a sense. And before we move on to the next god, I want to talk about one possible generic lord or hero choice. This is known as the Lord of Pain. And the main reason why I think we need something like this is mainly because, well, the Slaanesh lord and hero choices are fairly weak. You know, demonettes are good when they're mounted. Right now we need the chariots to get fixed and all that, but they're not very heavily armored. They are very squishy. Their main damage output, you know, is chariots and magic. So why not something that you can have in the front line and not have to worry about so much? This would be the Lord of Pain, as it's got a massive weapon. It's able to do some area of effect, you know, and it will just be able to deal damage alongside, say, for example, Marauders of Slaanesh, or Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh and Chaos Knights of Slaanesh if we ever get them. I'm just using some examples because, yeah, it's very noticeable. Slaanesh's damage output is mostly focused on skirmishing, but lore-wise and tabletop-wise, you could use some other stuff, so this would just be kind of nice to have as an option. So let's talk about Khorne, and we'll start off with the Wrathmongers, mainly because these are Demonkin units, meaning that they're half demon, half human, so they kind of fit well in a monogod roster anyway. Now, these were introduced in the end times, and they're pretty cool because these are anti-infantry units. They're basically just flailing about, which is super cool. I mean, the models are awesome, and that gives us a reason to have something different. That gives us a reason to have flails in the army, something which can focus on an anti-infantry unit. They'll be able to do a lot of damage. Likely they would rampage though, because this is kind of how they work. And yeah, I mean, it's just awesome. These are a elite unit that'll obviously be something like tier 4 or tier 5, but you'd already see them in game. They fit so well, mainly because they were brought into Warhammer Fantasy through the end times, and yes, they just fit the theme very well. They're Demonkin, and they would be very well implemented eventually if we do get a mono-god Chaos Warrior faction, or just generally for the mono-god Khorne faction. Skull Reapers are another unit that could be added in, and these were added in during the end times once again. These were very much close to becoming Demonkin, very heavily mutated, as you can see, with two different types of weapons, additional hand weapons, and obviously a great weapon, so you already know what their uses could be in Total War Warhammer 3. The idea is just to add in something nice and something cool like this. These would obviously be like a tier 4, tier 5 unit, and the idea is just to have something very, very strong. Keep in mind that when it comes to Khorne, Khorne's probably in the best place because the damage output is quite good. There are some issues with Khorne that will be highlighted in a future video, but the main idea is just to have more heavy armor. You do notice that when it comes to early on, you will mostly go for Chaos Warriors other than Bloodletters, because the Chaos Warriors have a better damage output, they also have better weapon options, they have more uses in the battlefield, and, well, you know, it's just that they're generally better. Not counting in Exalted Bloodletters, of course, but you know what I mean. Blood Reavers could be a perfect way to add in some, well, new style Marauders of Khorne, mainly because a lot of us are kind of sick and tired of seeing recolors, because that means that we would have paid for the recolors, what, 3 times? Chaos Warriors, Norsca, and then obviously the Monogod factions. Same thing with like the Chaos Spawn and so on. It's a very obvious thing. So they look very much similar to that of Marauders, just the difference is they have great weapons, they have additional hand weapons. You could probably have them with sword and board too, just to give them a proper option with a shield. And there you go, they look different, they'll have the same function, but the most important thing is that they'll look different and they'll have a different feel. It's not paying for the same thing just with a little tint on them, which frustrates me to no end. This is a franchise that makes a lot of money because free base games and obviously a lot of DLC, and for some reason that we just get the same unit just with a little tint on them, which shouldn't happen. Blood Warriors could easily be Chaos Chosen of Khorne because, well, we've already got Chaos Warriors which use the same assets as the Skull Crushers. These look a bit different but would have the same functionality. We've got additional hand weapons, we have sword and board which would use an Iron Fist instead just to give it a bit more flavor, as these would be like less wanting to use a defensive thing, so an Iron Fist kind of looks like a offensive weapon, and obviously great weapons too. So we've already got some options there. They look pretty cool, and come on, I mean, they fit with the theme. They fit with the theme so well. If we're going to have a lot of stuff that's just coming in which is going to feel like a lot of stuff that we already have, well, why not make them look unique, and that way at least visually it'll be different, and visually people will be more happier about it. The Slaughter Priest would work well as another buffer, lord, or hero option. Yes, we do have that with the Blood Reaper and obviously the Herald, but I'm saying just a bit more extra, something else to add in, more on the lines of that of a Warrior Priest or just something completely unique, mainly because Khorne has no spellcasters, so an extra buffer character would work out really well and provide a bit more support. I'm not saying that I know exactly how this would work, but it's just to put the idea out there because look, no magic does put you in a clutch, you're able to do some damage and all that, but given some issues that Khorne has at the moment, when there's low winds of magic, you'll take increased damage because you'll have lower physical resistance. I mean, having something to just help might be very useful. More generic lord and hero choices would be better overall, especially for Khorne, as Khorne has the least, but we're going to have to wait and see what Creative Assembly have planned. Keep in mind, obviously, that all the other races and factions do have more lord choices, so you know what I mean? It's just nice to have some variety. Tzeentch is in a weird place because even in Age of Sigmar, not a lot of stuff was added in. Of course, there is the Zangors, but we've already spoken about them in the Beast Fiends video, so this would just add in some extra units and so on. And they would work quite well just to add in a bit more flavor, especially a frontline unit, which is kind of needed at the moment. But even then, keep in mind that Creative Assembly and Games Workshop had to team up to create a new unit in the form of Doom Knights, so I'm not too sure what they'll be able to do, but the main thing is just adding in some stuff just to give a bit more flavor. Tzeentch kind of needs it at the moment. Frontline, they just get demolished early on. Khairic Acolytes are an interesting unit because they could be brought in as a pseudo Warrior of Chaos for Tzeentch. This is because they look rather different, or they could be brought in as Marauders, and I think Marauders could work quite well. They'll have the same functionality, more or less the same stats, but with the included barrier will make them much stronger. Obviously, we can see here sword and board, great weapon, halberds works well too. We can already see that technically one of them has an axe, which kind of counts as a halberd. So we've already got a bit of variety, new weapon types for them specifically, and just being able to do a bit more frontline damage. Tzeentch will definitely need some more help in terms of more units. Hopefully some new stuff comes out when the Disciples of Tzeentch get a new army book when it comes to Age of Sigmar, or maybe at that point we'll be at Old World and we'll be starting to see new units. I mean, I can hope at the very least. The problem is that we do need these units if we want the Chaos factions to get a lot more flavor, some more units. Unfortunately, it's mostly mortal, like I said. We haven't had new Chaos demons in, I want to say 10 years, maybe even more. It's been a while, because most of the cases it was just updated, and updated. That's the problem when it comes to a Games Workshop. You're not going to get new units, you're just going to get new stuff updated. I'm not saying this will solve a lot of the issues, but some extra units will at least give variety to DLC options, which will then fluff up the factions a little bit more. I don't want to see the Chaos factions, especially the Monogod factions, being stuck at around 20 units for the rest of the series. They will need some new stuff. I know a lot of people aren't keen on the Age of Sigmar stuff and the end time stuff, but let's be honest, it's going to be needed. Again, if they're backward compatible in Warhammer The Old World, then they're technically Warhammer Fantasy models anyway, so I don't see why this is an issue. A lot of people have been saying, again, this is an IP issue, it's a different IP and all that. Well, they say that End Times is a different IP and we already have End Time stuff. So clearly it's not so much of an IP issue when the IP holder, Games Workshop, is allowing for it. I know I'm just screaming into the wind in most cases, but the idea is I just want the Chaos factions to be a bit more fun, and obviously as DLC comes for Kislev and Cafe, because we know they're going to get DLC, we had those lore chats with Andy Hall which established more units and so on, we need more stuff for Chaos too, or else they'll start falling flat. Even keep in mind that the faction that has everything together, which is obviously Legions of Chaos as Chaos Undivided, is struggling, is very much struggling. So maybe this video is more on a open letter and style to Creative Assembly and Games Workshop. Just start considering more end time stuff and some Age of Sigmar stuff that fits the theme. Nothing out there that doesn't fit the theme, of course, but just stuff that does feel like Warhammer Fantasy or was originally intended for Warhammer Fantasy, but then, you know, end times and all that type of stuff. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion, as I'm curious to see what you guys think about these units. I think the consensus is that you guys are getting a bit more welcome to it, but, you know, maybe you find other units that might fit better. You never know. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.